Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for hanging with me on this Sunday. And if you went out of your way to like, comment, or subscribe, thank you. All right, so each topwater has a preferable way to be fished in a certain condition in a specific lake or time of year. So I'm going to give you a rundown on every single topwater that I've ever caught a bass on and basically what I think the perfect conditions. And I'm not going to just give you, oh, if you throw a whopper plopper, you need wind. I'm going to be a little more specific, and it's not just always about weather. Sometimes it's about the type of lake you're on, if it's grass, if it's highland, or what kind of forage you have on your lake. Because if your bass are into eating trout, then, you know, we're not going to give them all these little tiny topwaters. But if your bass feed heavily on bluegill, then I'm going to give you the right types of topwaters. And it goes to gizzard shad and threadfin shad. So we're going to go down the list of all these topwaters. So the first one would be a buzzbait. A buzzbait for me is if I have fish that are in like a 200-yard stretch and there's no part of it that looks any better, that's where a buzzbait comes in handy. I can put the trolling motor on 50 to 100% and just go and not be worried so much about making the perfect cast. I just cover water. Now, the conditions I like with a buzzbait, hot, sticky, changing pressures, I want a bubble trail and all that, but you can catch them on wind. If you have a lot of wind, that's where I really like to add plastic to it, so put a big horny toad on there. If you're fishing around grass, you really don't necessarily need any specific condition. I've had bright, sunny days with no clouds and bass come out of the grass and eat it. So that's a buzzbait. Long stretches. Now, if you get into backwater areas, it's the same thing. Maybe a shorter stretch, but you don't really have anywhere that you think is anywhere better. That works really well on rows of docks. So if you have 10 docks you got to fish and you got to do it quickly, a buzzbait is a great way to fish those. You never know where they're going to be bit, or where you're going to be bit rather, and you can just cover all the docks quickly. And it seems like with a buzzbait, unless you can put it around where the fish live, and I know that's, you know, probably a cliche you've heard before, you're not going to catch big ones. So I live on Lake Guntersville. I've caught very few big fish on a buzzbait because the time of year where the buzzbait really shines, I think a lot of those fish are either tucked up under cover or out on offshore ledges. So the buzzbait for me on this lake doesn't catch big ones, but you take it to a Chattahoochee River fish and it catches the biggest ones on those lakes. So it depends a lot on where you're throwing that, but it's great numbers bait where I live on Guntersville. So let's dive into more specific area type baits, a popper or a prop bait. And those two for me are interchangeable. I've never been to a lake where if one of those didn't work, the other one also would work in some form or fashion. So maybe everyone's throwing a popper, you can get a little more bites on a prop bait, but it's a very similar bait in the type of fish it catches. Now, one is going to be better than the other every time, but it's your job to go out and figure that out. So tannic water, lowland reservoirs, highland reservoirs with crystal clear water, a prop bait or a popper, I've seen it work on both of those. Wolf packs of fish, it is great for both of those. So I'm going to put those in the same category. Great for the brim spawn, great for wolf packing bass. And again, it's pretty open. I've seen it work really well on Lake Eufaula. I've seen it work really well on Smith Lake, and those two lakes are completely different. One has tea-stained water, and it's lowland. There's no current, and then you have a lake like Smith Lake, Highland, Mountain Lake, deep, clear, and full of spotted bass, and they bite both of those on that lake. So Tennessee River, I've seen both of them really shine. So it really, I don't think it matters. Now, I will say this, if you have needlefish in your lake, I really like a devil's horse. So it is still a prop bait, just long and slender. It seems like down in Florida where you have less visibility in the water, the prop bait really works. Works, in my opinion, better. But Florida is really the only place where I've seen the prop bait work better than the popper. Now, again, they're interchangeable, so you can try both of those. Now, the last would be the big walking baits, the super spooks, shower blows, the vixen, all of those big walking baits. To me, the key to those is gizzard shad and actually seeing a gizzard shad. So this is a bait that I've won a ton of money on, and I've overused this bait in situations where it just didn't work. So You hear about a topwater walking bait bite in the post spawn. To me, that doesn't necessarily mean you can just run down the bank in the post spawn walking your big super spook. You're going to have really tough days. I've tried that a lot and it's never worked for me. I think a super spook, critical is you have to be around gizzard shad. You want to see them flickering on the top of the water, on the surface, pick up a spook and cast around where you saw those gizzard shad flickering. Or the bass need to be very specific on what they're eating. So you go to a lake in the fall that the big ones just feed on gizzard shad, and then you can target bass that are already used to feeding on those, and that's where the big topwater walking bait comes in. But it seems like it's a very specific deal. Either the bass on that lake key in on that shad, and you got to go for those bigger shad, or you are seeing those shad come up, and that just typically means a bass is chasing them. It's in the area, and that's what it's feeding on. So that's very important for the topwater walking bait. I don't think conditions and all that matter as much as the forage and it being a gizzard shad and hopefully, in distress, and that typically means bass are in the area. But that's the most important thing for me on that. Now, the last one would be your plopper, whatever you want to call it, chopo type baits. And that one's a tough one because that one works in a lot of situations. You can catch them dirt shallow, catch them in the grass. It's just a really unique sound, and I think that if fish haven't heard that, especially spotted bass, they go crazy over it. So if you are fishing for bass that haven't been pressured a lot, that's an awesome bait. Windy points, it's a lot like a buzz bait and a spook, where you got to be fishing for the bigger fish on your lake, and you also need to be around areas where there are bass, but they're just long stretches. They're big areas. Maybe they're big points, wind-blown points where you need something that causes a little extra commotion. You go to those points, you fish the 100 yards around the point, and you can make really long casts. You can, really draw a lot of drawing power with that bait. So that's that bait. Now, there's a bunch of different sizes in that. So you can go down to the really small one and imitate bluegill. And so that bait is very versatile, and I've seen it work in a lot of different situations. I think the fall is probably your best time with that bait when the fish get really shallow, but it catches them in all phases. And it's a great bass bait. It's great around, low-hanging limbs and stuff like that. So that is just an awesome bait all around. Definitely one you should learn. But that is about it when it comes to topwater fishing. Conditions, very important, but I also think the lakes and the forage and all that are just as important. So try those. Good luck to you guys, and I'll see you on the water.